The Scrum Framework. The Scrum Framework is a popular methodology used in agile today. It's used for managing like very complex projects, especially in software development companies. Companies like Paystack, Google, Amazon, Facebook, all use the Scrum Framework. So whenever you hear a company say, "Oh, I'm running a sprint," or a program manager saying that, like, "Oh, I'm currently running a sprint," or "I'm in the middle of a sprint," and all that, there's a very high likelihood that that person's company or organization is using the Scrum Framework. The Scrum Framework basically allows you to build in a very iterative way. So, meaning that you build incrementally and it allows for flexibility while building. And Scrum as a framework has like um about three key roles. It has three key roles, it has four artifacts, and it has five events that helps your team work together to build effectively. Let's take a look at each of these roles. So in a Scrum team, that's what you're gonna hear them call like companies, product teams that use Scrum. We call them Scrum teams. In a Scrum teams, there are like three major roles in a Scrum team. You have the product owner, you have the Scrum Master, and you have the development team. The product owner and the Scrum Master in a lot of Nigerian companies today are usually the same person. So you see basically product manager playing the role of product owner and the Scrum Master with it. The product owner is basically responsible for setting the vision of a product team and managing the team's product backlog. They work very closely with stakeholders and the development team. By stakeholders, I mean people that have an incentive for that product to work. It could be the customers, it could be the owners of the company that they work with, the organization, people that like have dropped money, people that are like the founders, the sponsors of that particular product. They basically work very closely with these people to understand what their needs are, to understand what their requirements are to build that particular product. They also work with the development team itself. I mean by development team, I mean your designers, your software developers, your quality assurance specialists, and they work with this team to ensure that like the entire product backlog is prioritized, updated, and they are responsible for defining the work that needs to be done. So I'm going to touch more on product backlog as we go along. So the second role within the team is the Scrum Master, right? The Scrum Master is responsible for ensuring that the Scrum framework is followed and that the team is following the Scrum principles. Are they making sure that like they are dropping their daily updates, stuff like that? So the Scrum Master is the one who is in charge of like Scrum events and they coach the team on like agile practices. By Scrum event, like I said, I'm going to touch more on it as we go forward. And they're responsible for making sure that the team is not blocked in any way. There is no obstacle preventing them from doing what they're supposed to do. Now, for most Nigerian teams, the product manager basically plays the role of a product owner and a Scrum Master within the team. So they're responsible for like aligning on the vision of the particular product, and they're also responsible for ensuring that the team is building according to what has been planned in the Scrum framework. The third role within the Scrum framework is the development team. The development team is responsible for delivering the shippable product that you're trying to build, and they do this in increments. So by development team, some teams might not have a quality assurance person, but basically the team responsible for building this particular product that you're working with. You have your developer, your quality assurance specialist, your designer. You can have your maybe back-end engineer, front-end engineer, the tech lead. These are the people that like constitute your development team. Now, I also mentioned that there are about three or four artifacts that are present within the Scrum framework. We have the product backlog, we have the sprint backlog, we have increments. So like let me go again. We have product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. The product backlog is basically a prioritized list of work that needs to be done for a product to be completed. Now, in reality, in like today's world, your product backlog is usually very long. It's a list of things, new features that you want to add to a product that you need to prioritize basically to build eventually. And the product owner is responsible for making sure that the product backlog is constantly updated, and based on the feedback that I've gotten, based on feedback from your both your customers and your stakeholders, and changes within the market. So yes, the product owner, like the product manager in this case, is responsible for the product backlog. We also have the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is a list of items from the product backlog that the development team plans to complete during the current sprint. It is basically created by the development team during the sprint planning event. Like, so I'm going to touch point on some of these things later. So the sprint backlog is basically when you are moving into a new sprint, all the things within that sprint that, these are the things that we're planning on building within the sprint. That's what's called the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is the list of items from the product backlog that a team plans on like completing during the current sprint that they are in. And then the last thing is increment. Increment is the sum of all the product backlog items that have been completed during the current sprint and all the previous sprint. So what that means is, so if you have if you've been working in sprints, all the items that you've done before and all the things that you have completed within the current sprint, so the increment is basically that. And it is usually a shippable product increment. What I mean is, like, once you're done with a sprint, usually you should be able to ship what you've done into like your current product such that it would make a difference. It's like you're adding a new feature to the product that you're building. It could be that you're fixing a particular problem with your current product. It could be that you are adding a entire new feature to your product. So it basically can be shipped to the customer, like, and it will be noticed that, there's a new increment to this particular product that I've been using before. And the last thing is the events that we have within the Scrum framework. We have the sprint planning event. And before I talk about the sprint planning event, I have to talk about what a sprint is. I haven't mentioned what a sprint is. So there are 5 events in the Scrum framework, starting with the sprint. A sprint is a time-boxed iteration that usually lasts between 2 and 4 weeks. So let's say 1 and 4 weeks. And the goal of a sprint is usually to deliver a potentially releasable products increment. So what I mean by that is, a sprint is like a time frame or that a particular team has decided to work for. Say between 1 and 4 weeks. It will be 1 week, it will be 2 weeks, it will be 3 weeks, it will be 4 weeks. And it's usually you're trying to build a incremental part of your product where you can potentially release that increment, that feature at the end of the sprint. And usually the time frame for a sprint in the agile framework can vary across different teams. It's not set in stone. Some teams use some teams use 1 week, some teams use 2 weeks. Not one of the most popular sprint time frame is usually 2 weeks. So usually shorter sprints, like between 1 and 2 weeks, are often used for like project that requires you to keep building like as fast as possible and to always get feedback. So you can use shorter time frames, so that's between 1 and 2 weeks. While for longer sprints, it might be used for like very complex project that like needs a lot of development and testing, and maybe like a very, very big feature that will take a longer time. So yeah, that's when you can use longer sprint. That's when like between 3 and 4 weeks. It's also important to note that the length of a sprint can be determined based on the specific needs of a particular project or a particular team. There's no like one size fits all for different companies. As a company or as an organization, you tend to decide which particular sprint length you want to follow. So let me give you some practical examples of companies that run sprints today. Spotify runs a 2-week sprint, while Google runs a 1-week sprint. Apple runs 2 weeks or sometimes 3 or sometimes 4-week sprints. And it's very important to note that there is not like I said, there's no one size fits all solution for choosing a sprint time frame. Now, the next event is sprint planning. The sprint planning event is kind of like a meeting or like a sit down where a product team, which is the product owner, Scrum Master, and the people within the team, that's like the developers, the QA person, the designer, they come together and plan like, okay, these are the things that we want to do in the next sprint based on the capacity that you have. Like, say this person can take on this amount of work within the next 2 weeks. So you're able to plan how much work you are expecting to do within the next 2 weeks or within the next 4 week sprint based on the time frame for your sprint. And the next event within the Scrum framework is the daily Scrum. So the daily Scrum is a very short meeting that is held every day during the sprint, and the purpose of it is basically for you to come together as a development team and be able to talk about the progress that you have towards the particular sprint goal that you set for your team. And it's usually between 15 and 30 minutes. And basically, the format for the daily Scrum is for you saying, oh, this is what I worked on yesterday, this is what I plan on working on today, and oh, these are the things that are blocking me from continuing my work, or these are the things hindering me from doing my work. And the next event is the sprint review. The sprint review is held at the end of each sprint, and it's basically used to review all the work that you've done so far within the sprint. You can, showcase it to your stakeholders, you can showcase it to maybe your head of product, and you come together to say, okay, this is what we've done so far. This is when we started our sprint, this is where we are. And now that we are here, we finished the sprint. This is the review of our work done, and this is what we need to do next. So that's what the sprint review is basically. It's for you to review the work done within the sprint. And the last thing is the sprint retrospective. The sprint retrospective is a very important part of the sprint of the Scrum process. This is where the team comes together and look at what they've done in that sprint so far and basically reflect on what they need to do better, on what they did well, what they need to do better, what they need to improve, and what did not go well within the sprint. So the sprint retrospective is basically a time to come together as a team, and it's a very, very I won't say intimate affair, but it's a very good time for the team to come together as a whole and say, okay, these are the things that we need to improve for ourselves. These are the things that we did very well. These are the things that, okay, that we messed up and we need to do better. So that is what basically constitutes the Scrum framework, the artifacts, the events, and the roles within the Scrum framework.